It's Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs. Let's start the show with Lewis Tennant. Here we go. The guests and interviews that you're looking for with creators, innovators, and so much more. For all episodes and further info, verbalhighs.com is the place to go.
Okie dokie then. Welcome to Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs, a podcast podcasted sporadically. You should never post sporadically. It's Media Project 101. Should be regular and consistent. Mine's kind of regularly, consistently sporadic. There's still episodes going up. But it's not as regularly consistent as Season 1. That was last year. New listeners, there's 50 episodes from Season 1. We're up to about 60-something now in total, Season 1 and 2. Trying to get to 26 for this year, which would be, 76 for both years. Here's a time-old intro riff for regulars of this show. I went to seriously think about recording this intro on Friday. It's now Monday morning. Beautiful Monday morning. I've eaten just the right amount of food. Have only had a small amount of existential fear whilst in the shower, which passed. Day's looking good. Not to say that, hang on, I don't want to paint the picture that I'm someone who's kind of been like cowering under my duvet, or doona, as our friends in Australia call it. Not at all. But everyone has a little bit of existential fear. That's not the point. I'm going off track. Oh, God, I knew I should write a list for this intro. Not long, folks. My guest will be here shortly in recorded form. I'm starting to ramble. No, I more mean that for some reason I procrastinate with actually, it's like when you have to do anything that's ultimately beneficial for you, like exercise or study or whatever. I struggle with these bloody intros. Jason was great. My guest was Jason Hoyte. Very professional man, but also very open and honest. A really interesting mix in that regard. Shook hands and straight out the door when he left. When he finished, rather. Not in a cold way, but I'm a man with things to do. But then opened up about things like a particular situation when he grew up, and also talked about how robots control Shortland Street, which I found fascinating. Just anything about behind the scenes of something so sort of prolific and long running in New Zealand. Huge amount of production credits to his name. He turned up a little early, and I was cramming late to get a page of sort of bullet points on him, and it sort of dawned on me quite close to the episode that he'd actually done more than I realised by a long shot. Not that it's kind of obscure, unknown stuff. Probably more that I was away for nearly 10 years in the noughties. We're at 2 minutes 45. So I'm going to wrap this intro up presently and tell you if you want to subscribe. That'd be lovely. You can do that on iTunes and leave a star rating out of 4 or 5 of the 5 options. 4 or 5 stars and a comment would be great. Hasn't been a comment put up probably for about a year now. It's always good when unsuspecting member of the public get feedback from people who've listened. Can also like the show on Facebook, Dr. Tennant's. No, oh God. Oh, I don't want to start this again. Normally I would. It's actually Verbal Highs Podcast on Facebook and Verbal Highs on Twitter. Ladies and gentlemen, Jason Hoyte.
Thanks. Hello, Tal.
This is Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs.
Great stuff.
Voice professional.
Well, I work in radio now, mate, so you know.
But you do a lot of voice work.
Yeah, I do.
In general, don't you?
Yeah. Ever since I got into acting, really, it was one of those things that you got to have a few other skills other than the acting in order to survive. So I did a lot of reality programs like, Border Patrol and Dog Squad and Coast Watch and all that sort of stuff, which actually, at the end of the day, was, my kind of lifeblood for a while. And it's great because you just sit in a studio drinking coffee and reading scripts, and they pay you well.
Seminal New Zealand programming.
Yes,
but
indeed.
So you're not the voice of those shows anymore. You sort of said.
Oh no, I still do that. The reality is, when I do radio full time now, so it's really, and it's the same with my acting work. It's what I can do in terms of still being able to do the radio every day, and filming and other work is kind of difficult to do, so it has to be very carefully managed.
But if you're like I know this from voiceover work with, I was going to say commercial stuff, it's all commercial, but I'm meaning commercials in the advertising sense. If a company has a voice, like the voice of Pack and Save,
yes, indeed,
surely they want to retain you, like, so.
Oh yeah, I mean, and particularly
they find a voice alike.
Well, I remember I do a show called Dog Squad.
Yeah,
and I'd been doing it for about 3 years. And TVNZ suddenly decided that they wanted a new voice, and I was in this really weird situation. So I said, okay, well that's fine, it's not my decision. But then I ended up going back in and re-auditioning for the job of the voice of Dog Squad, and it was kind of weird because I'd done 3 series, so that's probably the longest audition tape that they could ever watch. But actually, what ended up happening is they went back to me anyway, so it was just this huge palaver, and nothing actually changed.
On the Dog Squad thing, I'll introduce you. Jason Hoyte is a screen and voice actor, comedian, and radio host. There's a reference to Dog Squad in here. Who's graced a wide range of projects on our screens and airwaves. So much so, in fact, mate, that I didn't know what to include in this list. From What We Do in the Shadows to Radio Haraki's Daily Bouja to the Alternative Commentary Collective to the voice of TV smash hit Dog Squad. He has an honorary degree from the New Zealand Radio School, and another guest who has a Billy T Award on the bookshelf.
Yes, I do, actually. When I was part of a duo, Sugar and Spice, with the great Johnny Bruff. And actually, that year it was funny for the Billy Ts, because I think Radar got the Billy T as well, to Radar. Brendan Lovegrove got it, and Johnny and I, as Sugar and Spice, got it. And I think what they were basically trying to do is just get rid of us all in one go. Rather than to do it year by year, they said, oh, look, let's just get rid of these guys because they're going to annoy the crap out of us otherwise. So we'll just give them all a Billy T this year and be done with it.
It's not typical to have multiple. What a clump of talent in 1 year.
Yeah, well, I mean...
but that sort of fits in with... I've talked to a few guests about this, sort of the age of what we'll roughly call stand-up in New Zealand. Probably makes sense that a number of people had honed their chops by then,
Yeah, well, I mean, I went to school with Brendan Lovegrove. I went to Dilworth boarding school. Right. And so we've always been great mates. And I actually met Johnny Bruff through Brendan Lovegrove, because Brendan Lovegrove went to Sacred Heart for his final year at school, and so Johnny Bruff went to Sacred Heart. Yeah. So we all kind of formed a band of brothers, really, and Radar I've known all that time as well. So we were very much of a generation in terms of, we lived together, we played together, we won awards together occasionally. Most of the time, to be honest, it was a debacle. But yeah, I think there's a generational thing. I mean, comedy, the stand-up scene had started well before us, of course.
Not hugely before, though.
No, not hugely before. Yeah. No, you got your Alan Bros, your Corbett Brothers, that kind of thing. And, I guess we were the next sort of generation to sort of come along. So, yeah, I mean, Raids and Brendan and Johnny and I were very much of a group.
So what was the diet that motivated everyone? Like, New Zealand media was pretty sparse and desolate back then. Was it? I mean, in terms of what we were being fed from overseas. Yeah, things like the Young Ones, Monty Python.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was into all that stuff. But it was one of those weird things, because when I was at school, I was always the class idiot. And right back for as far as I can remember, actually, I was the comedian, and that was almost a default setting for me. And then in my sort of last 3 or 4 years of school, I did a lot of drama at school, and I did a lot of acting work. But I was always told in that regard, and I had a bit of success in that, but everyone always told me, including my parents, of course, that you can't make a living doing that sort of nonsense,
Which is a time-old sort of parental riff, but it kind of... It had a bit more credibility to it at the time.
There was some truth in it, because the acting industry in New Zealand was still pretty small. Yeah. I mean, the comedy industry was still really starting out. Yeah. It was still in its infancy, I suppose. And so I think unconsciously I never, even though that was probably my passion, that was what I was always kind of destined to do, unconsciously I think I kind of interpreted that in my brain as I can never make a living doing this.
Yeah.
So it was never kind of a feasible option for me. And so I went to training college immediately that I left school.
To what, get a trade?
Training college as in students, as in teaching.
Oh, yes.
Because, that seemed like a good idea.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a good idea because I'd been at boarding school for 9 years, and all I really wanted to do was go out and enjoy myself and experience the world. And being back at training college, was really like being back at school. And it was a weird choice, really, given that I don't really like kids.
You've got some now, though.
I love kids.
They're an exception, though, eh?
And I remember there was a guy, Ed, who was head of education at the training college there. He was the big boss. And we used to have a thing called a section where you go away into a classroom for a month and teach. And they'd come out and assess you as a teacher and stuff. And Ed came along and he watched me teach and he said, Jace, I think you'll make an outstanding teacher. You will be an outstanding teacher. The only problem is I don't think you'll last. And I said, what do you mean, Ed? And he said, I just don't think you'll stay being a teacher.
So he could see that Wunderlust. He could see that Wunderlust in your eyes.
I think.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to him, oh, no, Ed, of course I will. No worries, mate. I'm into it.
Yeah.
And I left 3 weeks later. So he was right.
Wow.
But, and then I went to... I was having a great time flatting for the first time and with Brendan Lovegrove.
Yeah.
And Radar was kind of in the picture.
So sort of like boarding school, except without the prison aspect to it.
Without any sort of discipline aspect to it.
Yeah.
And so we flatted together with another great mate, Martin Lark, who sadly is no longer with us. And that's where we met Johnny Bruff. And to be honest with you, mate, it was really a time of having fun.
Yeah.
And trying to make money where we could.
Performing,
and both Brendan and I ended up working for Greenpeace for about a year.
Yeah,
and we made
trying to sell it to people on the street.
Yeah, literally door to door,
literally door to door,
which was heinous. Yeah, it was horrible.
Yeah, I've tried to do that work before. I tried telemarketing. I lasted a day and a half.
I did a bit of telemarketing as well. It was just I lied at those things. I pretended to be talking to people. You know what I mean? So they'd go, "Oh, he's doing well," but no.
I never thought of that.
But you go and knock on someone's door for Greenpeace door to door, and you never knew what you were going to get.
Yeah.
You never knew what was going to... And some people... At that time, actually, luckily for me, Greenpeace was relatively popular. And so, generally speaking, the reaction was quite a positive one. But occasionally you get a real nutter who would just, go off.
Someone's here. Someone's at the door. Yeah.
I got bitten a couple of times, too, by dogs, of course, when you go into people's property and they go on the attack. But so I did Greenpeace for a while, and then I went to university.
Yeah.
Which is what you do when your parents start hassling you about getting a life. And I did a BA, but to be honest with you, I spent my entire time at the bar.
Oh, it's of the era too.
Yeah.
Which uni?
Auckland University. Yep. I was studying a BA, and it's only in hindsight that I can sort of see it. But it was really.
In hindsight, you could see what?
Well, I could see that I wasn't ready to sort of commit myself to anything. I wanted to experience the world a little bit. And as it turns out, those years where I was sort of, I guess you could say, a layabout, kind of defined me in a way and kind of was the fuel of my comedy. Johnny and I and Brendan just hanging out together, going to parties, going to nightclubs, experimenting with certain things as you do at that age, you know, and those kind of were formative in terms of me getting into the whole comedy sort of scene.
But I think you say a layabout, maybe your definition's a bit different to others. Like you were working, you were going to uni.
Yeah.
You might have been in the bar a lot, you were holding a flat down.
Pretty much the whole time. Yeah. We were holding, and we were, it was a great time in our lives, we were young and everything seemed possible, really. So
the bit you haven't mentioned through all of this is are you guys going and doing open mics and stuff like that at the same time?
No, what actually happened there was I was doing a play at the Dolphin Theatre, which is in Onehunga, and Scotty Blanks, Scotty Blanks, who runs the comedy, he was part of the play. It was 12 Angry Men was the play. Good bloody play it was too. But anyway, I guess I used to tell amusing stories in between things and while we were rehearsing and so forth. And it was actually Scotty who was running the comedy festival as we know it now. Well, the comedy scene, I guess you'd say. He said to me, Jace, have you ever considered doing stand-up? And I said, no, I haven't. And he said, well, you really should. I think you'd be really good. And weirdly, rather than go and do stand-up by myself, I immediately thought of Johnny Brough, because we were great mates. We had an absolutely identical sense of humour.
And you'd gone through boarding school with him and Brendan, right?
Oh, no, I met John after boarding school through Brendan.
Yep.
And we'd been hanging out as mates for about 2 years, getting into all sorts of mischief and stuff, and having a great time, basically. And I remember saying to Johnny, would you like to do some stand-up? And he went, okay. And so it was a really weird thing. So we did our first ever Rookies Night. I couldn't even tell you what we did that first night.
Well, that was my question. I totally remember Sugar and Spice. I'm from Wellington, so I wasn't going out to things in England, but I do remember you guys being in comedy festivals. I think you would have come down to Wellington.
Yeah, very much so.
So
I mean, Bats was our home away from home.
That's right. You did a lot of stuff down there. So how does one do like when it's stand up inverted commas, bunny ears, and there's two of you? I'd imagine it's a bit more of a. I guess everything's performance, but you know what I mean? Is it more like skits and so on than hey, I observed this today
I don't think that Johnny and I even really knew what we were doing, to be honest. But it was always kind of skit related. It was always we would take on characters. Yeah. And that just seemed to be the natural way for us to do it. And we tried to do things that we found funny. Yeah. Which is the key to comedy. You can't, the biggest mistake that people can often make in terms of comedy is to try and do something that they think other people will find funny, whereas we just did, we had characters and stuff and we chucked them out there and we gave it a bit of a crack and people really enjoyed it. And we were like as surprised as anyone, really. And I guess we caught the bug of comedy in terms of performing in front of a live audience and having people really enjoying what we were doing,
So... were you ever just yourselves on stage, or was the whole thing in character?
No, I don't think we ever were really ourselves. And if we were ourselves, then we were a heightened version of ourselves. We were an extreme version of ourselves.
You've described doing radio at the same time, haven't you? I bet you're not yourself at home on the couch when you're on Boozer.
No. When once again, that is smoke and mirrors to a certain extent, as all performances, really. Yeah. And I think that, on the radio, I'm probably the most like myself that I can ever be in terms of performance. Yeah. But having said that, I'm still not myself. It's still an exaggerated version of myself. And in radio particularly, you have to
accentuate the whole theatre of the mind, kind of. Yeah,
exactly. So, but a lot of it, of course, is smoke and mirrors.
Have you had that sort of awkward scenario where the public expects you to be?
Yes.
It sounds like very often. Yeah.
Well,
come on, I'm just here with my kids. Yeah. You can't bite the hand that feeds you, but
and you've got to treat people as well as you can. I do a lot of selfies and stuff like that, and I don't, especially with Lee Hart. He's a big. People love taking selfies with Lee, so that's become a part of my life. But I remember one really awkward situation where I had literally just finished doing the radio show, and I was by the Empire Bar, and I was waiting for the lights there. And all of a sudden, a stag party came across the road, and there was about 15 guys, and they were as pissed as chooks. They were pretty hammered. Yeah. And they surrounded me, and they were like, "Oh, it's Jason Hoyte, Jace." And they literally surrounded me in a circle, and I was standing in the middle of this sort of circle, and they were all shouting, "Say something funny, Jace! Do something funny!" And that was just a nightmare scenario, It was like, that sort of scenario is pretty uncomfortable. It happened with me with the ACC too. But, generally speaking, people are pretty respectful in terms of, not crossing the line.
Yeah, I mean, and I think probably the New Zealand, the sort of New Zealand personality probably makes it a bit easier than other places. We tend to be quite sort of standoffish.
And I'm not that huge. I mean, I'm a C grade celebrity.
Well, it's funny what you just said, because just uncanny, the line that you said that they said to you is my one very vivid memory of when I was doing breakfast radio for a period, as a woman who said exactly that. Oh, you're da-da-da-da-da from the radio. We're sitting, I actually remember it was in the middle of Cuba Mall in Wellington. Can you say something funny? And it's sort of like, you can't, there is no...
I'm just going to turn the tap on and be really amusing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Where's Jonathan now when we leave Sugar and Spice alone? What's he doing?
No,
with himself?
Jonathan's doing great. He's of course did what we did in the Shadows, and that was a huge success. And he does a lot of acting work, so he's still doing his thing, and doing a bit of comedy. He did a lot of work after Sugar and Spice, of course, with Jackie Van Beek. Yep. Which was really successful, and he's just like everyone else, getting by, doing what he needs to do, I guess.
I noticed. I mean, you've, like I say, I wasn't exaggerating when I sort of said your list of performance credits is really, it's really not only large but really broad for New Zealand across a lot of stuff. I was out of New Zealand, kind of. What would you call it? The what do you call 2000 to 2010? The noughties?
Oh, personally, the lost years.
Why is that?
No.
Okay, we go with that, and I'll ask you what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually through the stand-up comedy. I mean, because interestingly enough, I don't consider myself a comedian.
Yeah.
I consider myself an actor. And actually, after I did the play and I started getting into comedy, a guy called Alan Brough, I don't know if you remember Alan Brough.
I know that name, yep.
Who was a big influence early on for us. He said to me, "Have you got an agent?" And I was like, "An agent? No, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, have you got an acting agent?" And I said, "No, I haven't." So I ended up getting Karen Kay, who's an agent here in Auckland, as my agent, and my sort of acting career started from there. I started doing auditions and started getting quite a bit of work, and and that's where the voice work came from as well. So I sort of managed as an actor to, I've got 4 daughters and I had a house and stuff.
What sort of age range are they now?
Oh, they're sort of 21, 22 down to 10.
Right.
Yeah. And my 2 eldest have just graduated from university and doing very well for themselves.
Yeah.
God knows how that happened. But anyway, it was a really tenuous existence because as an actor, you don't... There's no security there.
No.
And when you've got a mortgage to pay and you've got kids to look after, it was a very sort of stressful time in many respects. And that's why voice work was so important to me, because if I was predominantly just focusing on the acting front, I'd never have survived.
Yeah.
But having the acting plus the voice work plus the comedy, I managed to sort of cobble together a kind of a minimal existence.
Yeah, and I think what often some do is you because it's that weird balance of like art and creativity and commerce.
Yeah.
I think some people end up being too precious to their detriment. Like you've got to take gigs where you can get them, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And it sounds like Karen's a very good agent, by the way.
Yeah, she was great. And particularly when you start off. I mean, because people don't know who you are.
Yeah.
And the only way that people know who you are is when they start seeing you doing things.
Yeah.
And then you start getting into a situation where people are specifically asking you to audition.
Yeah.
And if you're going relatively well, you ultimately get into a situation where people aren't even asking you to audition, they're just asking you to do the part, which is the ultimate, you know.
Yeah. So you're on the radar, and
you've got to be on the radar to work. And I was at that stage where I'd do anything basically, like most people, like most actors, to survive. But as I say, it's a tenuous existence because you never know. And I think in many respects actors and performers in general are inherently insecure.
Well, it's, as you sort of said, it's a life of insecurity. I don't mean in the mental health sense or the mental sense, but it's an insecure gig. What's a secure gig in New Zealand? I guess a radio show to an extent, or Shortland Street.
Yeah,
would be a gig. You did that for a while, didn't you?
Yeah.
Were you excuse my knowledge of Shortland Street in the last 15, 20 years?
I have no knowledge of Shortland Street either.
But were you a sort of a key character for a while, or a walk-on?
I actually have the dubious honour of killing 3 of the main characters on Shortland Street.
So you were cast as a villain, a heel.
I was always the villain, and I think I was a drug addict, and I attacked one of the main characters with an axe.
Yeah.
The other the other 2 times I was a pharmaceutical rep, and I blew up someone and killed someone in the bush in the other one. So it was.
Did any of those characters ever smoke a cigarette on screen?
No.
I noticed there was a period on Shortland Street where if you were in any way, mentally unstable or crazy or a villain, you'd smoke a cigarette.
Yeah. No, I don't recall. I would have loved to have been able to smoke on air. That would have been great, actually, because Shortland Street's quite a stressful. It's a real machine.
Yeah,
you know
talk
what I
about
mean?
that process. Like you because it's edited live, right?
Yeah.
It's 5 shows a week, obviously.
Well, it's the most.
Are they all filmed on one day, or are they filmed daily? That's actually quite an interesting question, I think.
I think they get 31 minutes of, what would you call it, broadcasting time each day. And to put that in context...
Wouldn't it be under 30 with the ads and stuff?
Oh, I know, but, it is literally a machine. It's the fastest. It's the fastest turnover show in the Southern Hemisphere.
Yes. Wow, I didn't know that. Right.
And to put it in context, say you're doing something like Outrageous Fortune or something like that.
Yeah.
You're looking to get probably 4 to 5 minutes a day.
Right.
So Shortland Street's getting 30 minutes a day.
That's crazy.
So basically what I learned on Shortland Street is that as long as you get your lines out, then they'll take it. There's no sort of, how did you feel about that? There's no kind of, it's like, right, moving on, let's go.
You've just forgiven why sometimes some of the performances are a little bit corny. It's like,
well,
we've got to get this.
I realised early on, actually, that the only way I was going to get another take was to deliberately stuff it up. So if I was to...
it goes really badly.
So if I'm in the middle of a scene, right?
Yeah.
Seriously, I was in the middle of a scene and I was going, this is shit. I'm not doing what I want to do.
Yeah.
I deliberately stuff it up so that they'd have to do it again. Because I did a couple of scenes early on with Shortland Street and they were terrible. And I was like, oh my God, that was just appalling.
Yeah.
And they'd be like, that's great, moving on. And I was like, what do you mean moving on? That was terrible.
Yeah.
But because it's such fast turnaround, they don't have the luxury of actually being able to do that. So basically, if you get your lines out, then it's let's move on.
But I can also see how that would be a very good experience for your craft in general. That teaches you a lot of things very quickly.
It's a great training ground for actors. It really is. And also for directors. And, a lot of directors go through Shortland Street and learn the business.
Yeah.
And as an actor, you learn the business. You're literally, there's 4 cameras that are all sort of automated, I suppose you'd say.
So they're not even operated?
They're not even operated by people. So you've got these 4 cameras that operate.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is they operate and they go strictly off the lines. So there's no fudging the lines on Shortland Street. If you get your line wrong, the whole sort of thing goes and blows up.
But hang on. They had the technology to make the cameras know what there must be a human controlling them.
Well, there must be something controlling it, obviously.
Got some,
the cameras do move off the lines. So if you get your lines wrong, then the cameras go into a state of computery confusion.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know how that works.
But it's crazy. But I mean, it is. Shortland Street is a great training ground for actors. It's intimidating when you get in there because, if you start losing your lines, which is every actor's nightmare, I was never really in that situation. But if you start losing your lines, you can get into a panic. Yeah. And there's no place for panic in Shortland Street. You've got to get it out. You've got to do the job. And you've got to move on because it's heavily time restrained. So
I wonder if some people just like...
I'm sure
never
there's been
come back.
meltdowns.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
And the other thing with that is, I won't dwell on this too long, but I was thinking with your clever scam to get a retake, there must be a level of tolerance from the production end where if Joe actor does that X amount of times, it's like, we can't, your character's getting hit by a bus or something. Because you can't have someone holding up.
No. I mean, if you're continually doing that, if you're continually making mistakes, then they would, definitely look at, moving you on or giving you less lines, I imagine, further down the track, particularly if you're along there for a few months as a character. But, I'd only do that every now and then if I was particularly appalled by my performance.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that.
And lastly on that, I've seen infomercials for things like the Mega Memory kit, and, that I'm sure on That's Incredible. When I was 7, I saw someone who could recite 52 cards after they were thrown on the ground.
Yep.
What's your system for learning lines of dialogue very quickly.
Literally just repetition.
Yeah.
But, one of the...
But leading up, you're in the bathroom, you're making a sandwich.
I specifically tend to sit down with them and learn them. And I was really lucky in that I was always kind of... Lines just stuck with me, and that's just the way it was. Actually, as I've got older, it's got worse and worse. I have to work a little bit harder. But one of the keys, actually, too, is to say your lines out loud. Because, you learn your lines in your head in sort of an interior monologue. And often when it comes to an audition or when it comes to when you're filming, when you say them out loud, they kind of surprise you. And they kind of have a different texture, I guess, in a weird way. So I like to walk around saying my lines, out loud, because that's how I'm going to have to do it on the day. So you might as well do it as you're going to do it on the day. Otherwise, even little things like that can really throw you.
Yeah.
But, it's weird because I remember when I was doing stand-up comedy and, you'd have jokes in your head and you'd be standing at the lights, saying these lines, talking to yourself, and people would think you're insane.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I remember Brendan Lovegrove talking about standing at the lights, talking about stabbing a kid, and then he'd look around and people would be going, what the hell's going on?
I remember when the Bluetooth headsets hit, and I'd go, why is that quite together-looking gentleman raving to himself? But before that, so I was going to ask, when I looked at your, I guess your written show reel, your CV, your list of productions, one that seemed to be mentioned a lot was 7 Periods with Mr. Gormsby, and that was that period that, as I say, I was out of New Zealand. So forgive me, I have no idea. I've not seen it.
Yeah. But
it seemed to be a sitcom in a time when New Zealand didn't produce a lot of sitcoms. Was it a sitcom or comedy? I don't know what you'd call it. But
it was a comedy series,
Yeah.
and written by Dave Armstrong.
Written by quite a Wellington mafia and performed by sort of Gadsby and...
Tom Scott and Danny Mulheron, Danny Mulheron was also the director of it.
Yeah.
And it was based on a character that Danny, I think, did on stage called Mr. Gormsby, who was basically this old-school English teacher.
Yeah.
Who was very old school and very un-PC about everything that he did, and they decided to make a series about it. And Gormsby actually it did pretty well in New Zealand, but it was absolutely massive in Australia.
Really?
It was huge in Australia. Australians just loved it, and it was one of those great shows because, as an actor, I loved it because it went a little bit too far.
But you were, just for context of everyone out there, you were the creepy guidance counsellor.
I was Steve, the guidance counsellor, and
my guidance counsellor at Wellington High was called Steve,
and I had a tremendous ponytail as well.
Oh my God! Because Dave worked at Wellington High, and we had a guidance counsellor called Steve, and it was around the same time.
Yeah. and Steve, the guidance counsellor, was literally the most loathsome creature you will ever meet in your life, and he was so much fun to play because he was despicable in the truest sense of the word.
But you can't have stuff like, the immediate thing I think of, unfortunately, is sort of like, coming on to the students and stuff like that. It wasn't... No. You can't really do that on TV.
No, it was all about being a counsellor, and it was all under the guise of caring for the kids, when the reality was he didn't give a shit.
Care, right, okay.
He didn't give a shit. And all he was really interested in was shagging all the other teachers.
Okay.
But, he had the ponamu and he had the ponytail. He had the look of a counsellor, but the reality was he was just a heinous human being.
Was he quite sort of, soft-spoken?
Absolutely. It was like, please take... I remember there was one scene with Hoyte, who was the main student, and he was always in trouble. And there's this great scene where I'm talking to Hoyte, and I saying to him, look, tell me about what's going on for you, and it was that kind of vibe. And then a very attractive female teacher knocks on the door, and she comes in and goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you." And I immediately say, "Oh, no, it's not important." I.e. just completely dissing Hoyte and putting him there because it's attractive female.
Yeah.
And that was the sort of character he was, you know what I mean? But that was a lot of fun. And
do you think that, coming back to you talking about you growing up, like... not so much the guidance counsellor and that particular character, but did you have quite a few old school tropes in that era of going to boarding school? Was it was it an enjoyable time, or was it sort of a bit of a... Okay, so
I loved it.
So there weren't sort of bad teachers in the
Oh
old
yes,
school
of course there were. Yeah.
Was there a religion around it?
Yeah,
or?
it was an Anglican school, and we used to have to go to church 4 or 5 times a week.
So I'm just old enough that I remember the end of corporal punishment. So it would have been a bit of cane as well, for good measure.
I got caned, I think, was it 62 times while I was at school, and honestly, I think I worked out 59 times that I was caned of the 62 times I was caned were for talking when I wasn't supposed to be talking.
So and
the irony is now that's how I make my living. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's
so
the irony of it.
I mean, you've come up in that area of that era. Like, what do you? I mean, it's a little bit of a deep question, but what do you think of it now? Is it like punishment as due, or is it child abuse?
Well, once again, hindsight, I suppose. It's kind of a weird thing.
It is.
A grown man beating someone with a stick.
Yeah.
Bend over,
Yeah.
smack you on the ass. And some of these guys were brutal. Like, you'd have blood welts on your ass.
Yeah.
Blood welts.
Yeah.
And I look back and I
Caning's
go...
serious business.
And the fact that I got caned 62 times, 59 of which I was for when I was talking when I wasn't supposed to be talking, kind of tells you maybe this isn't working. You know what I mean? Oh, hang on. We've caned Jason 60 times for talking. Maybe we need to try something a bit different here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But, I think there's better ways of dealing with kids that are, having issues.
Because you've got kids up to early 20s now. Does school? You reckon schooling looks a lot different from what you've observed of it, what they've come through? Because as I say, I'm sort of on the I'm capital punishment, corporal punishment would I reckon finish when I was about standard 4, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Mid 80s.
No, it was right through my career.
School looks a bit different now.
School's very confusing for me. I get their reports, and I go, I don't even know what this means. Seriously, I look at their reports and I go, well, what is this?
They need night school for parents to learn how to do NCA.
It's like, did you pass or did you not pass? I don't know. I can't. What is this?
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I'm a bit old school in that respect, and that things like maths and English, and just teach kids the basics. I think we're afraid of with kids telling them that they haven't passed, but you know what I mean.
But I think failure can be as
informative as absolutely it can. And so we don't need to be so afraid, and it gives kids something to work for. And now it's achieved with merit, achieved with excellence, did not achieve, or and it's just like,
well, you should see now they come, because I've fallen into the teaching racket later in life, and it's weird because we still operate kind of at uni on that what they call the Cambridge system, which is what we came up in. But then you've got students who've come through the NCEA system. Yeah. So the two worlds kind of smash together like atoms when it happens. And I didn't know about all of this at first when I came back in. I had no background in education, didn't train to be a teacher and so on. And it took me a while to suss out, this is why these guys struggle with not only kind of writing the essays we expect, but even understanding the A, B, C, D system we have. I've had to explain why things add up to 100. What's that worth?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's what I suppose I'm trying to say is that, and it's a hoary old cliche, but it's like we need to get back to the basics a little bit. Kids need to learn certain things as a sort of foundation for their education. I think it's becoming a little bit too sort of esoteric.
Yeah.
Well,
what's it worth if you go? Sorry to cut you off. What's it worth if you go out into the world and everyone's got a degree, but no one got D's? It's like to make the A's, B's, and C's worth something.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, you actually need D's.
Someone to have D's, E's, and F's. It's a weird thing.
Yeah.
It is a weird thing.
So you and Lee, you and Mr. Hart, it seems you've done a lot of stuff together. And
we have.
I think I've said this exact same question a couple of times throughout, but how did that come about? Peas in a pod?
I don't... I did a
fellow thespian or just a radio?
Well, no, Lee's he's a performer, but he's more of a, because of course he makes all of his own stuff, and he's kind of a pioneer in that sense. But I ended up doing some skit for him once, and I can't even recall what that was, to be honest. And then I ended up being part of Moon TV and Speedo Cops and all that sort of stuff, and it kind of went from there.
So it would be fair to say he was sort of an early adopter of the kind of technology DIY thing that's come about.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And you know, he made his own shows. He'd made a few series of Moon before I'd even met him, I think. And so he was very much of that school of you know, I'll just do it myself.
Yeah.
And
so you did a skit for him, and yeah,
he
from
obviously
there,
thought I was genius, and went, I've got to get this guy back on.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, we did lots of stuff together, and we have, you know, done a lot over the years. Yeah.
So that answers another question I sort of had in the back of my mind, in that I was looking at a lot of the, not indie, but the more sort of like, how would a network, you know, how would a network even embrace that in its sort of idea stage? But it's sounding like he's coming to them with, you know, already produced at least pilots or whatever of these, you know, from the fishing show or whatever. So is that how it works?
We're not talking big budgets, I think, initially. But
Well, I mean,
Lee's always had a maxim, and I think it's a really good one, to under-promise and over-deliver.
Hey, that's quite a good mantra.
Yeah, so, you know, and he's very much of the do-it-yourself kind of school. And, you know, I look at big productions sometimes, and I see a lot of waste.
Yeah.
You know, and I go, you don't need all that stuff. You don't need all this stuff to actually make something. And particularly with technology the way it is, and cameras the way they are nowadays. Lee was just one of those guys that went, you know, I'm going to make it myself. He's got another guy, Brent, who does all his camera work, Spillane, and he's brilliant at it. And he does all the audio and the camera work, and he'll have 2 cameramen. But it's very basic, but it's all you need to make something, you know what I mean? And you know, of course, editing. He's got his own editing facility. So, yeah, he just put it all together, had a bit of success with that. And he reached a point where, with TVNZ and TV3, where basically they said, do what you want.
Right.
And we'll put it on
That's
for you.
sort of what I was... Yeah, that's sort of confirmed what I was asking. Yeah, it's like, you know...
Well, the proof's in the pudding, you know what I mean? And, you know, he's got a huge following as well. So, you know, he was just one of those guys that loved making TV and just got it done. And that's really the key for him, is getting it done. Because we talk a lot about these projects. We can have great ideas, you know, and I want blah, 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 and, you know, I've always had these great ideas, but actually the key is to actually get it done.
There's a lot of that in the creative world, talking about things. And,
projects, yeah.
So you've done... He's not involved in the Cricket Collective, which we'll talk about in a bit.
Oh, he is?
He is?
Yeah,
okay,
he was.
But together you've done... There was the late night Big Breakfast. Is that still going online, or
no? I think it just, you can get it online. Yeah, we did the late night Big Breakfast. We did Moon TV. We just
Screaming
did
Reels?
Screaming Reels just recently.
Yeah,
which was a lot of fun. We've done. You know, it's one of those weird things. Like, people ask me often, "What have you been in?"
Yeah,
and I go, "Well, I don't know, stuff." You know, I don't. You know, and actually, you know...
And then they say, can you say something funny?
Yeah, can you be funny? And it's like, no, piss off. But it's like, I've always been one of those people that does the job and moves on. You know, and I don't... You know, it's only when... you know, my agent will say, we're updating your CV in terms of your performance credits and stuff. And I look back and I go, holy crap. You know what I mean? I've actually done a lot of stuff, but I really don't remember it.
Well, that's good. We'll go recent then. I like fishing.
Yes.
Did you like fishing before you started this show?
Actually, I love fishing.
It's one of the moments I'm most relaxed in my life. I find it very meditative.
Hand on heart.
Yeah.
Not on Lee, but on my heart.
Yeah.
I genuinely love fishing. It's what was one of my passions. And the thing about Screaming Reels was, it's the most sustainable fishing show that's ever been on air.
What do you mean sustainable?
Well, in 6 episodes, we never caught a fish.
You set me up. You set me up for that. That was a knock joke, man.
Yeah. So, you know, that was quite an achievement.
Yeah.
And
is that true?
Yeah.
Well, that must be shitty.
That was
shitty footage.
That was the premise of the show. Was that we did this high octane fishing show, because it's a piss taker fishing show.
Okay,
basically.
good.
And that we never catch a fish.
Yeah.
We have all these amazing techniques and all this stuff, but actually we never catch anything.
Do you have any like fights to the death and then nothing comes in? I've got to watch. I'm going to watch it tonight.
Yes.
And was that online? It was online and it was on telly for a minute, wasn't it?
It was on Duke, I think.
The man channel.
Yes.
So yourself and Lee weren't necessarily from broadcasting background, but
No.
I mean, sheesh, you've got a pretty primetime show on a station with a lot of history.
Yeah, we do.
How's that going?
Well, I started doing the ACC. I was rung by Jeremy Wells,
It's the Alternative Commentary Collective, folks.
yes, and saying, because he knew I was passionate about cricket.
Yeah.
I was actually quite a relatively high-level umpire for a while. I did Premier Cricket and stuff like that. And I knew Jeremy through Moon TV and stuff like that, and he said,
Yeah.
would you be interested in doing an alternative commentary?
Yeah.
And I said, hell yes. I mean, that's like my dream. I'm a cricket nut, and I love the game, and the idea of commentating, it's always been a passion and a dream of mine.
Right.
And so I said, bloody hell yes.
Yeah.
And so we did this alternative commentary to one-day internationals, and it just went gangbusters, and the audience was huge. And the concept behind it basically was to have an alternative commentary, but something a little bit different from your bog standard comedy. And it went great guns. And
Because I was going to say that, I've heard some alternative commentary that was really funny. Like, I think it actually started when I was first listening to it in Wellington on Radioactive, and it was, you know this story, it was John Campbell and a friend of mine, Jim Scott, Sparky Plug and Friendly Brains, and there wasn't actually a lot of rugby knowledge. There was a lot of jokes about stiffies and small shorts and stuff, but I'm guessing, so you guys actually came with some pretty solid cricket knowledge as well as silliness.
I mean, Jeremy and I and another guy, Mike Lane, who was also one of the guys that started it, and who's currently the head of Hoyte, they're all cricket nuts as well.
Yeah.
And then we had Matt Heath, Lee Baker, who is a cricket nut as well, and of course Lee Hart, who really knows bugger all about cricket.
Well, you need one. You need one of those.
You need one of those. So we did have a background in cricket, but the whole idea of it was to make it funny and enjoyable, and to create something that was a little bit outside the box that people might enjoy. It was more entertainment than commentary. But the great thing about cricket is we had the ball by ball commentary, so it was legitimate in that sense. And and I remember just putting on the earphones for the first time with the microphone the first time we started doing it, and I just felt like I'd come home.
Oh man!
I just went, oh my God, this is my dream to commentate cricket. And it started.
But wait, so you didn't mind that it wasn't straight up and down commentary?
No,
it probably suited you better.
To a degree, that ball by ball is straight up and down. And we did that relatively seriously.
Yeah.
It was the sort of comments in between that where the humour was.
Yeah.
And I just fell in love with it. And I remember coming to the end of the first season, and I went up to Mike Lane, who worked in radio at the time, and of course Jeremy Wells did.
Yeah.
He was already on Radio Hoyte, as was Matt Heath. And I said to Mike, I want to work in radio, man. I want to do radio. And he went, okay. And he said, we'll get together with Lee. So Lee and I got together, and we did I can't even remember now, like an hour-long show or a 2-hour-long show on a Saturday for Radio Hoyte.
I think you did a couple hours in the morning.
On Saturday.
Yeah.
And that sort of went...
Traditional kind of sports show territory for Radio Live and so on?
Sport Bourgeois or something, I think it was called.
Yeah.
It might have even been about sport, but it wasn't really about sport. And we did that and kind of were feeling our way through the process because we'd never done radio before.
Yeah.
And then we sort of graduated to doing an hour show every night after Mikey Havoc.
Yeah.
And he'd do from 3 to 6 and we'd do from 6 to 7.
Yeah.
And then and that went pretty well. And then we ended up taking over from Mikey Havoc and doing the drive show on Radio Hoyte, which we've been doing for about 3 years. So in all, about 5 years we've been doing radio.
Enjoying it?
Yeah, it's tough, man.
Why is it tough?
It's
I mean,
tough because
I know radio quite well from a performative point of view. Yeah.
Well, particularly if your show's ostensibly meant to be comedy.
Yeah.
You got 22 voice breaks a day.
Yeah.
And it becomes a job because you're doing it every day.
Well, I'd suggest it
is a job, and they pay. They're paying us good money to do it.
Yeah,
but it is tiring, and it's hard to. I'll be honest with you. There's times when you're sitting there in the studio and you're just going, Jesus, I've just got nothing. You know what I mean? I don't know what to talk about anymore.
When I did, speaking of Mikey, sort of like be defamatory, but it's something you know everyone knows about. So I did breakfast years ago in Wellington on Active, which is kind of Wellington's B. Then I just sort of went away for a while and I came back and I was sort of a band-aid on Mikey's show in that when he was on B the last time around, he never could make it for his 6 a.m. Breakfast start. So I did it for a
interestingly,
while.
he couldn't make it for his 3 p.m. start on Radio Hoyte either.
Yeah, it's the elephant in the room, but yeah, no. So I certainly know about mornings going up and you just go, I've got nothing today. Whether it's like, you know, the ebbs and flows of being a human, sometimes you're just flat.
Of course.
Other times, it's production stuff, and I get it, man. It's,
it's like, you sort of hit the nail on the head. I mean, we're human beings.
Yeah.
And some days you just don't feel funny.
No.
And some days you walk in there and you just go, I don't know. I don't know what I want to talk. But strangely enough, sometimes those can be the best shows. And Lee and I are very freeform. We don't do a crap load of preparation. We're literally 10 seconds before we go on air. A lot of the time, I have no idea what we're about.
Oh wow! So you don't? I was going to ask that. You don't have a little production meeting for half an hour before or after?
Never.
That's very efficient use of your time.
Yeah, and that's kind of what's made our show kind of special in its own way.
What's the flash? Is it a reverence? What do they call that?
Yeah, it's irreverent, I suppose.
It's bullshitting.
And, yeah, it's just talking shit, man.
Yeah.
As guys do, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, often we'll have a very vague idea of what we're about to talk about, and that kind of gives it a certain edge. But you know, it's one of those things. It's like, you know, you have days where you're really struggling to come up with stuff, and other days where it just flows and it's over in a jiffy. You know what I mean?
It's interesting you say that some of those really struggle heavy ones that end up being your best shows. It's sort of funny how the universe does that. Is it just the two of you? Isn't there three of you on here?
Yeah, well, there's another guy, Lobo de Noche. There's a guy, Matty Ward, who we call the Night Wolf. He does the night show.
The Night Wolf.
And then we had another guy before him called James, who was our producer, because neither Lee and I can do the panel.
Yeah.
It would be an absolute disaster if we ever tried to do it. And so Matty does the panel, but he's also the producer of the show. And he's just sort of, you know, he just chips in and says stuff when he wants to, because he does the night show as well.
Right,
and
so he's your panel guy.
He's our panel guy, but he's also,
yeah.
you know, he's a big part of Bouger now.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
we sort of include him in a lot of our stuff. But yeah, you know, it's one of those things. I love it, but at the same time, there's days where I hate it.
Yeah,
you know,
but at least it's 3 or 4 p.m., not 5 or 6 a.m.
Yeah,
I look
true.
at I look at those. Speaking of prep, something like those morning TV people, where that's the life of a baker, which I've always, I'm just not a getting up at 2 or 3 a.m. to do a job.
Yeah,
and then I couldn't understand how someone like Duncan Garner must just have work in his DNA, how at one point he was doing that brekkie show and getting up at that time and then doing Drive on Radio Live. Like, I'd be hospitalised about week 3.
Well, I think, Jesse Mulligan, does Drive on
it's amazing,
the national program, and also, I think some people just love to work.
Yeah, and I guess if you get in that loop and, drink lots of water and...
Yeah, look after yourself.
Yeah.
Don't get steamed every night. You'll be fine.
It'll be fine. But who's doing that these days anyway? What else? You've been casting a lot. This is too sort of general, a wishy-washy question. But what's the secret to that, man? What's the secret to sort of being asked back and asked back and asked back?
I really don't know. I think that despite everything in public perception, I suppose, I'm actually pride myself on being pretty professional about what I do. Yeah. And, I take it pretty seriously. But I don't, when I'm on set, I'm there to do a job. Yeah. And when you're on set, you're required to know your lines. Yeah. You're required to have made the effort and to have done the preparation for it.
Turn up on time.
Yeah, turn up on time, all of that sort of stuff. And I enjoy acting, and I think I've always been pretty professional about the way I've gone about it, but at the same time, I'm not precious about the art form. Yeah. I'm not, oh God, I'm an actor, just leave me be while I get into character, please, sort of thing. I'm not one of those actors. Yeah. I get on and I do my job and then I get off again,
Yeah.
and as I was saying earlier, I don't think about too much what I've just done. I tend to do the job and then move on to the next job. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't, I'm not a big watcher of my own work. I'm not a big promoter of my own work. I'm not sort of interested in that aspect of it. I'm just interested in doing the job well and then going on to the next project,
Did you enjoy doing Barefoot Bandits?
Yeah.
It's a bit of a common bucket list thing to want to be a cartoon character. Who were you? I had those guys in. I had those guys in. I
can't even remember.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, just when you said I don't look back on my work, it'll put you on the spot. But I just to say I had those guys in. It was one of the few guests that have approached me, these Muck Putty guys, and I just thought, wow, what a bunch of talent. Plus, I sort of admired I don't know if you know a lot of their story, but they were kind of like, they're around my age, and I think mid-late 90s when they were like, we're going to be animators, this is going to work.
Yeah.
And it's taken...
Well, it's interesting you say that because I did a voice for them not long ago.
Yeah.
And they've got this huge operation now.
Yeah, good on them.
I mean, I went there and it was a small office and I did some characters for them and it was great. And
You come back, it's like Disney.
Seriously,
it's like
and I came
Disney,
back,
like.
and there was this massive warehouse with all these people sitting at desks and
Yeah.
people skateboarding around. I was like, what the hell?
Yeah.
So they've obviously done
100
really well.
Korean people animating stills, you know? Like,
I've done a lot of animated sort of character work and I enjoy it,
must have been cool when your kids were younger, like, hearing Dad.
Yeah. Oh, no, my kids are just, my career is met with a sort of cacophony of indifference from my girls.
Better than, like, embarrassment. Oh,
Yeah.
Dad!
Oh, there's that as well. But they couldn't give a shit, to be
So
honest.
none of them have followed the sort of show business, media...
My eldest daughter, Jess, she's got a marine biology degree.
Oh, wow.
And
That's one of those occupations that lots of 8-year-olds say they want to be, but not many
Yeah,
people
yeah.
follow through. And I
Well,
want to be a marine biologist.
yeah, she's doing great. My
Yeah.
other daughter, Scarlett, she's a mental health nurse.
Wow,
Got
yeah.
her nursing degree.
Yeah.
And my daughter, Millie, who's just left school, she's probably, she might end up, she's very, very funny.
Yeah.
And she plays the guitar, but she works in a cafe and at this stage... shows
Sounds like
no,
she
but
might be going down the...
she does a lot of her own
Yeah.
artwork and stuff,
Yeah,
and
right,
so,
yeah.
that's in her genes. And,
Yeah.
and my youngest is only 10, so who knows.
Yeah.
And she hates being on stage. She had to do a speech today at school, and she was just beside herself. She was like, oh, God, I want to do this. I hate it. So, but that's great. 'cause
So
it's a typical-
which side's responsible for the strong line of woman in the DNA?
I don't know,
Are you the
actually.
only boy in a family of like 100 females?
I've
or-
literally got 4 daughters, and my
Yeah.
wife, I think her side of the family, her sister had 3 daughters.
So sounding like
So
that
I
side.
think it's their side of it.
So you don't have a bunch of sisters.
Oh, actually, I do. I was adopted, and I've subsequently found my birth mother,
Yeah.
and I have 2 sisters.
How was that? Was that process? Did you think about that a lot, or did you just sort of like? Did you have to do it at a certain age, or
Not really. I suppose I did unconsciously, but
had a good upbringing with the adoptive parents?
yeah,
and
and I went to
so
boarding,
nothing. Yeah,
boarding school from the age of 8 till when I was 18.
Yeah.
So, no, it wasn't something I really thought about, and when it happened, it was pretty awesome, and it was nice to meet my birth mother. And
but you started the process at some point.
yeah, I think I must have. And
Later
then-
in life, or
later in life,
Yeah.
and then I found out that she'd been looking for me as well.
Oh,
and
that's
so
nice.
It was kind of, Children's and Young Persons, I think it was called then, said, "Oh, look, your mother's got in contact. Would you like to meet her?" And I said, "Hell yeah!" So, and she lives in Australia, so I rang her in Australia, and that was pretty emotional.
pretty
I remember
trippy,
my
as
wife-
they say.
Well, yeah,
Did even on the phone call, did you go, "Oh, okay, there's some weird similarities here that is just obviously
well,
genetics and DNA"? And,
I was terrified, actually, and I
Yeah.
remember picking up the phone to ring her, and I'd obviously never spoken to her. I didn't know much about her, and I remember my wife was just beside herself. She was literally on the couch covering herself
my
with a
gosh.
duvet, going, "I can't handle this."
Why?
I can't-
Why?
Oh, because
Why?
it was just so
full on.
so full on,
Yeah.
and I rang up, and this voice answered, and I don't know that because she'd written me a letter saying, "You can call me if you want, but I preferred if you wrote me a letter first." But she left her her number there, and I went, "I'll bugger it, I'm just going to call her."
Yeah,
And
that's right. You're either like all in, or
yeah. And so I called her, and I remember saying, "Oh, hi, is Linda there? And she went, and there was this pause, and she went, speaking. And I said, this is Jason speaking. And then she just broke down. 'Cause she must have known that, she knew who I was, and she got very emotional.
Oh boy, yeah.
Yeah, she just got really emotional, and so did I, actually.
I was going to say, are you a crier, or are you someone who sort of holds it in? And
yeah, I would say I'm quite an emotional person. But I like most guys, I suppose, create a facade that I'm not emotional.
Someone in that exchange you just described had to hold it down for the benefit of it going anywhere.
But I cry at weird shit. I can cry at weird shit and deeply disturbing emotional stuff. I'm kind of indifferent to. It's weird. I don't know why that is. Yeah. But so I spoke to her, and that was. That was pretty emotional, as you can imagine, and found out I had two sisters. And
see, there you go. I told you, more girls.
Yeah, more girls. Yeah, and I eventually met her about a couple of months later. I think she flew over.
Still in contact?
Yeah. She's been having some health difficulties, which has been difficult. But no, in fact, my sister's coming over in 1 week's time.
Wow.
Yeah. So
spent a bit of time with her before?
Yeah.
Cool.
We were over to Sydney this year, actually, and hung out with them for a while, so that was good.
And the other question in this, you talk to people about adoption and so on, and if it's a question that you don't want to answer, that's fine. But it's sort of like, what was the reasoning? She was young. She was really young. Family whisked her off somewhere.
I think it was very much that she was of her age and generation. Where
that's right.
She found herself pregnant. She was, I think, only 16.
Yep.
And basically back then it was like, that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
You need to adopt your son out, and
sometimes weirdly for the sake of the sort of mana of the family or honour of the family.
Well, often they'd send mums up to the farm up north or something like that. What I mean?
Yeah.
And it weirdly, it turns out I was born in a place called Bethany Clinic.
Yeah.
And at the time that I found, which is in Grey Lynn, at the time I found that out, I was literally living about 50 metres from it.
That used to be a orphanage.
Yeah. So
is that on Richmond Road, the big old?
I can't remember the name it's road, but it's in Grey Lynn.
So
that was bizarre. It's like, my God, I was born in that place there.
You didn't even know.
No, I didn't know.
So it didn't say on your thingo where you were born. That's fascinating.
Yeah. I might have done, but
So what's a day look like now, aside from the show? Like, what projects are on at the moment? You don't strike me as someone who'd just be doing one thing.
Look, Lee and I often have to go away, and with the radio, we go down to Christchurch or the university or whatever, or broadcasting school. We're kind of busy a lot of the time, but coming into the end of the year, I think we're thinking of doing another late night big breakfast.
Nice.
And we've got the cricket coming up, and we've got the radio happening. So there's definitely a lot going on. What I try to do most of the time is just, chill out a little bit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it's quite nice when you're in the afternoon, you're doing the afternoon show. You get to have the mornings to yourself, and I go to the gym a lot now, and try and look after myself.
Look. 3 to 7 or 4 to 7? It's 3 to 7, isn't it?
4 to 7.
4 to 7.
Yeah.
What an ideal time of the day to do your main piece of income work.
Yeah.
You
do it.
You can do. Yes, I can do that in the evening. Yes, I can do that in the afternoon.
Yeah.
I
totally.
think it's a great time. I think, as I say, I found, I think those breakfast slots are really quite. It's a nice time of the day to be working. I won't keep you too much longer. I want to come back to something because you mentioned cricket again and reminded me. It's a funny old sport. What's the attraction to the slow rhythm of cricket?
Well, I guess
it's no MMA.
That's actually it, because I kind of like the meditative quality of it.
Yeah.
And there's something great about being on a park, and there's all action for 5 seconds, and then it's calm and sedate. Cricket, it's a really weird thing to try and explain to people, but it's a passion. Johnny Bruff, another guy, he's an absolute cricket nut.
Yeah.
But there's something great about the game, and it's a team sport, but it's also an individual sport.
Yeah.
And the great thing about cricket too, there's a lot of chatter.
Yeah.
You know,
but where? But in the team. In the
yeah,
teams.
yeah, in the team, you know, and I like that aspect of it too. But you know, I don't know. It's just something that seems to gel with my kind of personality very nicely.
Yeah, right.
You know, the sort of meditative quality of it, and I guess the history.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And the chat when you're out in the field, you know, and that sort of stuff. It all appeals.
So you're an Empire guy.
Yeah, I'm an Empire. Yeah, I guess I am. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe one day they'll start. I was listening to a podcast on sound design and sport and how it's changed. That now they've sort of like, it's like art imitates life. Like apparently, the video games tried to they looked at, you know, sports and made a more bombastic version of that sound wise, and then the sports went, oh, look at what EA's doing with their, you know, American football sound. We'll do that. And they were talking about miking up players as maybe being the next step. So maybe one day we'll get to hear what the cricket...
Well, they do that in 2020.
They do that in 2020.
Yeah.
They mic up all the players.
Oh, yeah, they do. And they, you know, the umpires got cameras on their heads, and yeah, it's kind of, I don't like that aspect of it. Actually, you know, you've literally got
a man
players.
His privacy.
Well,
imagine if Shane Warne was still on the...
Oh God, he'd never shut up. But the weird thing is, you know, you got a guy coming into bowl and they're talking on the, you know, to a guy in the field, you know, and he's going, yeah, it's going well, you know, and it's just like part of cricket, part of the magic of cricket is the tranquility of it. And especially with 2020, I hate 2020. It's sort of high impact, you know, big drama sort of stuff. I like the 5-day test as opposed to the bash of 2020.
Well, what you just described, everything. Like someone said to me once, you know, cricket's like a game of a nice slow game of chess to them. Before you go, I went through uni doing theatre and film with Jermaine and Taika.
Yes.
And at the time, sort of this nicely sort of rounds up a number of things we've talked about. At the time, we were doing theatre and film, wouldn't have even considered the idea of anyone ending up in Hollywood and all the rest of it. You worked with them on What We Do in the Shadows.
Yep.
Do they just strike you as huge talents? Did you work closely with them?
Oh, look.
You know,
when Johnny and I
think Taika was always going to be a star.
Taika's one of those immensely gifted human beings.
Yeah.
And he's good looking too, the son of a bitch.
His dad was the head of the Satan slaves in Wellington.
Oh, wow.
Interesting.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Oh, hell, look, we know Taika and Jermaine really well because, of course, we did Sugar and Spice. And we used to go down
Humour
Wellington,
Beasts.
And the Humour Beasts.
Yeah, right.
Which was those two.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say, but they were very much of our genre.
Yeah.
They came a little bit after us, a couple of years after us, but we used to always go and see the Humour Beasts and hang out with those guys. In fact, I made a short film with Jermaine and Duncan Sarkis.
Yeah, right.
Called Ash, which is still one of my favourite when Duncan Sarkis was trying to get into Sydney Film School.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very funny movie if you can ever get hold of it. But no, we knew the Humour Beasts. We knew them really well and we used to hang out all the time. So, you know, it just goes to show that if you're talented, there's no
limit.
No, there isn't.
But they're kind of,
there
I hear that, but I think what has changed, and maybe it's probably a number of things. It's Peter Jackson. It's HBO. However, that was wrangled picking up that show.
I think a lot of New Zealand actors have left New Zealand too.
Yeah,
Martin Chalkis and you know, Stu. What's his name? Henderson.
Yeah,
literally. And I think now, you know, when it comes to casting overseas, being from New Zealand is not a hindrance.
We're on the map. Yeah. And technology, the internet, all of that's got to change. You know, because as I say, this does sort of nicely, you know, bookend what we're talking about sort of around the beginning and throughout it. And that, you know, you're talking about that sort of time old thing of your folks' reaction to wanting to go out and do that sort of stuff. I just think the realistic, you know, what one thinks they can achieve is a lot different for someone who's 20 now in terms of what's been done.
Oh yeah, there's no borders anymore. I don't think. You know, so
I'm going to go to LA and get an agent. Look, thank you. When I looked at, you know, exactly how busy you are and so on, I thank so much for coming in
Pleasure.
and taking an hour out to chat. Thanks to Mr. Lovegrove for teeing that up. I'll have this cut and ready to go in the next couple of days. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, mate.
Cheers.
Cheers.